Curiosity made him clever. It also made him dead. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I value your voices. Wolfe starts digging. If you've ever seen Nero Wolfe interrupted at breakfast, you know it's an event worth marking in the calendar, preferably in red ink and with a note that says, "Stand clear." It was one of those mornings when the world outside might have been on fire, but inside the brownstone on West 35th Street, everything ticked along with the serenity of a monastery. Wolfe had his soft-boiled eggs, his Montenegro honey, and the Times. Fritz moved like a silent metronome between kitchen and dining room. I was on coffee number 2 and halfway through a piece about the Police Benevolent Association's latest gripe. Then the doorbell rang. Wolfe didn't look up. He said, without a flicker of interest, "Archie." That was all. Just my name, hanging there like a period at the end of civilization. I went to the door, because that's what I do. The universe could collapse, and Wolfe would still expect me to handle the interruptions. On the other side was a man who looked like he'd been awake since 1927 and hadn't liked a single morning since. Early 50s, maybe, though his eyes were older. He wore a gray suit that had seen better tailoring and worse weather. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked, as if confirming the name on a tombstone. "That's right," I said. "And this is the address you were looking for, unless you meant to visit the police precinct, in which case you're about 8 blocks off." He gave a ghost of a smile. Thin, quick, gone. "I was told you were the one to see before I make a mistake." I raised an eyebrow. "That depends on what kind of mistake you're planning. Mr. Wolfe doesn't offer marriage counseling." "I'm not here about marriage." His eyes flicked past me, toward the sound of cutlery. "May I see him?" That was new. Usually people come in knowing they want to see Wolfe, not if they can. "Your name?" I asked. "Damon Lee." He said it like it might mean something to me, but it didn't. "Occupation?" "I was a detective," he said. "Now I'm something else." Well, that's one way to start a Tuesday. I left him in the hall and went back to the dining room. Wolfe was still chewing methodically. I waited until he swallowed. There are limits to my recklessness. "A man named Damon Lee wants to see you," I said. "He claims he used to be a detective. Now he's something else." That got Wolfe's eyes off the paper, briefly. "Detective?" he repeated. "Employed by whom?" "Didn't say." I could ask. "Do." When I went back, Lee was staring at the hat stand like it had once betrayed him. "Who'd you detect for?" I asked. "Private work," he said. "Mostly corporate background checks, missing persons. A little insurance work before that." "Any of it involve us?" "No." That was good enough to get him inside. Barely. I brought him into the office, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Wolfe was still seated behind his desk, his immense frame sinking into the chair like a throne built to bear grudges. Lee looked at him the way an old soldier might look at a cannon, familiar, wary, and a little reverent. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I apologize for intruding." "You are," Wolfe said, "but apologies are wind. Sit." Lee obeyed, lowering himself onto the red leather chair across from the desk. "I know your reputation," he began, "and Mr. Goodwin's. I wouldn't be here otherwise." "That is as it should be," Wolfe murmured. "Why are you here?" Lee's fingers worried the brim of his hat. "Because someone's asking too many questions. About me, my past cases, people I worked for. I can handle being followed. I can handle being threatened. But whoever's behind this," he hesitated, "knows things they shouldn't. Private things. And they want something I can't give." Wolfe's brows lifted a millimeter. That's about as close as he comes to leaning forward. "What do they want?" Wolfe asked. Lee's eyes met his. "They want you." That one hung in the air like a bad smell. Even Fritz, passing through with a tray, paused. Wolfe set his coffee cup down with slow precision. "Explain," he said. Lee nodded, jaw tightening. "They said if I didn't bring your attention to a certain matter, they'd make sure a piece of my past, one I can't afford to have public, found its way into the wrong hands. I was told to come here, to make contact, and to pass on a message." "Which is?" Wolfe asked, tone flat. Lee took a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the desk. Wolfe didn't touch it. I picked it up and read it aloud. "The spice must be balanced. No signature, no return address. Just those 5 words, typed neatly on a scrap of stationery." I looked at Wolfe. He was staring at the note as if it had personally insulted his library. Lee exhaled. "That's all I have. They said you'd understand." "I do not," Wolfe said, voice clipped. "Nor do I appreciate being drawn into enigmas by intermediaries." "Neither do I," Lee said softly. "But whoever this is, they're watching me. And if they know where to find you—" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes, sir." "Lock the doors." And just like that, the brown stone, sanctuary of order and orchids, became a chessboard with an extra piece none of us had seen before. I slid the bolt and heard it seat like a period at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to finish. Wolfe's eyes went to the note on his desk, then to Lee. "If you've never seen a rhinoceros consider the merits of a mosquito, you've missed something." "Tell it entire," Wolfe said. "Economy of detail may be a virtue in telegrams, not here." Lee had the look of a man who understood that when you're in our office, the meter runs on truth. He took a breath. "I did something 10 years ago that can look crooked if you squint. A missing designer, fashion, named Hala Vaziri. She'd signed a contract with a men's clothier, Carthage and Winch. When she disappeared, I was hired by their counsel to find whether she'd been poached. I found her. She wasn't poached. She'd left because the company wanted her name, not her work. I brokered a private settlement. There was a money, NDAs. I signed one myself." He glanced at me. "A year later, their general counsel, Lionel Voss, switched industries to food science. He's now some kind of consultant to half the upscale restaurants in Manhattan. Still keeps files like a priest. I think he has mine." Wolfe grunted. "And the injunction." "It's airtight. If anything from it gets out, we all get burned. I don't have a copy. I don't even have notes. They're telling me they'll make it public unless I deliver you to this." He nodded at the 5 words between us like they were a snake in a glass box. Fritz passed through with a glance at the paper that could have been called religious if he'd ever approved of any faith other than butter. Wolfe flicked a finger. "Coffee? Another pot? And tell Theodore I'll be in the plant rooms at 11, if the day permits." That last part was for me. Wolfe's daily 2 hours with the orchids is as negotiable as gravity. When he adds if the day permits, it means the day had better bring war. The phone rang. It's a domestic sound until it does the wrong thing at the wrong time. I picked up and got a voice that was the oral equivalent of damp paper. "Is he listening?" "Only when I make it worth his while," I said. "Go ahead." "Tell him balance is a discipline, not a virtue. Tell him he's been heavy with cumin and light with grace." The line clicked dead. I met Wolfe's gaze. He did not like vulgarity applied to spices. "Male? Female?" he asked. "Could be either," I said. "The kind who'd critique your lunch and call it ethics." Lee had straightened in his chair. "They've played with me for a week. Notes in my building foyer. A shadow outside my window at 3 a.m. A voice like that asking me to remember whether I ever seasoned a report for effect." The snigger when I didn't answer. "Yesterday, this bring Wolfe in. The spice must be balanced. If I didn't, the Vaziri settlement would walk." The doorbell rang again. Lee flinched. I got up, feeling the geometry of Wolfe's office adjusting, him immovable at the focus, me as the leg of the compass, the other point in the city's underbelly. On the stoop was a courier in a cap with a company name that claimed it delivered swiftly and discreetly. I've worked with both. They're wars you don't win. He had a padded envelope addressed to Nero Wolfe in neat block letters. No return. "Signature," he said. The screen showed a name already typed, Archie Goodwin. I signed my name over my name and took the envelope back to the office. Wolfe didn't move his hands from the arms of the chair as I slit it open. Inside was a jar, clear glass, brass lid, no label. I unscrewed and caught the smell halfway to my nose, warm, citrus bright, with a bitter back note that pinched. Sumac and coriander, maybe, with something smoked to keep it from pretending it didn't have a past. There was a card. You prefer gentler acids. Adjust. Noon. Fritz came in with the coffee, and the expression on his face when he saw the jar could have wilted a souffle. "That is not from my kitchen," he said. "It wants to be sumac, but the berry is poor, and someone roasted coriander until it begged." Wolfe's lips pressed. "It is a taunt," he said, as if he were explaining botany to a child. "The hour?" I checked the card again. "Noon. Adjust." "Phooey. We will not." He turned his gaze back to Lee. "Names." Lee gave them without drama. "Voss is one, the general counsel who moved to food. Another is Celia Brandt, brand consultant, restaurants. She hired me 2 years ago to quietly check a partner's dalliance. I did. She paid. A third, Benno Tripp, works internal security for Torvald Mutual, insurer for half the fine dining kitchens. He dislikes me for a reason that starts with a poker game. The fourth is a writer, Daphne Kay. Food is her beat. We dated a month and broke it off. She owes me nothing. She knows everyone." Wolfe closed his eyes, which in him is not fatigue, but indexing. "And Hala Vaziri?" "She designs again, under another name," Lee said. "No contact since the settlement." The doorbell rang a third time. At this point, it was practically auditioning for a part. I went and found a woman on the stoop who could have been advertising decisiveness. Late 30s, blue eyes that didn't waste time, hair that had achieved an understanding with gravity. She wore a coat that said, "I'm not here to be looked at, but failing that, I will be looked at correctly." "Archie," she said, "don't make me talk out here." She'd never met me, but she said my name like a password that only happens to saints and men with listed numbers. "I'm Celia Brandt." "Come in," I told the brand consultant. If the day wanted balance, it was getting it. Another outsider in the temple before the incense burned down. In the office, she didn't bother with soft openings. She took in Wolfe, then Lee, then the jar on the desk. "Good. You got it," she said. "Which is an entrance line you want recorded for the jury." Wolfe folded his hands on his middle. "Miss Brandt, you believe we share a referent?" "I know we do," she said. 2 nights ago, a message was left in my mailbox. It said I should come here this morning, that, if I didn't, a client list I would rather not have explained would bloom on the internet like mold on a lemon. It also said, this is charming, that I've been over-salting narratives to sell thirst. She gestured to the jar. Whoever's sending the spice is playing games with metaphors. I'm not charmed. You rarely are, Lee said. His voice had an edge. Hers had a file. They looked at each other like two people who had once agreed on a bill and discovered later neither had read the fine print. I took Celia's coat and hung it. She sat without being asked, which is not recommended in our office, but not unheard of when nerves are being used in place of discretion. Wolfe watched them both the way a mathematician watches numbers decide whether to be prime. You were told to come at noon, he said. You are early. I dislike waiting, she said. And I wanted to get ahead of it. I guessed he would be here. She nodded to Lee. We share enemies. Do you? Wolfe murmured. Or patrons. Her eyes clicked to him and back. I'm not paying you. Not yet, I said. She smiled at me because it was cheaper than paying me. Lee rubbed a temple. Celia, they want him, he said. We're not the prize. We're bait. Please, Wolfe said, and the room went quieter by 2 degrees. No prologues for operetta. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. You will ring Mr. Panzer. Ask him to be minutes away by 11:30. Then Mr. Cohen at the Gazette. Ask him for a discreet profile of Mr. Voss, Miss Brandt, Mr. Tripp, and Miss Kay, with emphasis on recent spicings. Then Mr. Lee. He opened his eyes fully, which is as near as he comes to leaning forward over the chessboard. At noon, we will oblige our correspondent. Meanwhile, you will tell me, exactly, who else knows of your visit here. Lee swallowed. 2, he said. Daphne and Benno. I told them yesterday I might come. I didn't name you, but it's not a hard guess. Then prepare, Wolfe said. He closed his eyes again, but only to sharpen the outline of his next sentence. The brownstone is disturbed. We will not allow a 4th ring at the door to govern our appetites. He gestured toward the jar. Mr. Goodwin, remove that to the kitchen. Tell Fritz to put it somewhere it will experience remorse. Then make your calls. If you think suspense is gunshots and car chases, you've never watched Wolfe decide to sit perfectly still until the world comes to him. I took the jar and the phone list and went to do the simple tasks that turn into complicated ones, when noon is a word on a card and balance is an insult. By 11:30, the brownstone had the mood of a fortress that expected an assault and was insulted by the idea. Fritz was in the kitchen, probably reciting litanies to Butter to keep himself calm. Wolfe was back at his desk, hands tented, eyes half closed, while I handled the on-time morning's communications. Saul Panzer had answered on the 2nd ring, and when I told him to be minutes away by 11:30, he'd said, already am. That's Saul. He never asks why, just how close. Lon Cohen at the Gazette grumbled about rushing a profile without a headline. But when I said it was for Wolfe, he shut up and started typing before I hung up. I was finishing my coffee when Wolfe opened his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, Miss Brandt will require tea. She strikes me as a woman who thinks faster than she speaks, which can be dangerous without caffeine. Tea it is, I said, though I'd already heard Celia in the front room with her phone, talking fast and quiet. Lee was across from her, nursing his nerves and what looked like guilt. The pair of them had the air of people who just realized their shared secrets weren't as private as they'd thought. When the clock on the wall struck noon, Wolfe lifted his head slightly. Archie. Yes, sir. Open the door. We will receive. I unlocked it and stepped back. The noon sun sliced across the marble floor, turning dust into gold. The hallway was empty. No courier, no guest, no mysterious figure with a spice rack. Just an envelope, hand-delivered and resting against the bottom step. I brought it in and laid it on the desk. The paper was thick, the kind that comes from expensive stationery stores that never have prices on display. Wolfe studied it as though the grain might confess something. He nodded toward it. Proceed. Inside was another card, same typeface, same precision. The balance begins at 1. Prepare your table, and beneath it, a second jar, identical to the first, but filled with something darker, richer. I could smell cinnamon, clove, and something earthy that suggested ambition without ethics. Celia leaned forward. This is theater. Whoever's doing it wants attention, not blood. Perhaps, Wolfe said, but theater is dangerous when the playwright lacks restraint. Lee rubbed his jaw. What does it mean? Why us? Wolfe's gaze didn't leave the jar. Because you are their ingredients. Someone is concocting a demonstration. Each of you, Miss Brandt, Mr. Lee, perhaps others, has seasoned truth to taste. Now, apparently, Someone wishes to show that imbalance. Celia's chin lifted. So they want revenge? Not revenge, Wolfe said softly. Correction. I was about to ask what form correction might take when the phone rang again. Fritz was closest and answered it, bringing the receiver in with the expression of a man who'd found a wasp in his kitchen. It is for Mr. Lee, he said, setting it on the small table near the red chair. Lee hesitated, then picked it up. I watched his face go from pale to parchment. Who is this? He said. No, you don't. He stopped. Don't involve her. His hand tightened. Listen, you... The line went dead. He set the receiver down as though it might explode. They've got Daphne, he said. She was supposed to meet a source this morning. They said she's on the table. Metaphorically, I trust, Wolfe murmured. I don't know, Lee said. But if they hurt her... Sit down, Wolfe said. His tone was iron wrapped in velvet. Anger will not expedite her release. Mr. Goodwin, the call... traceable. Probably not, I said. If they're smart, it's a pay-as-you-go line bouncing through enough towers to make the FCC dizzy. Then we must deduce instead of pursue, Wolfe said. Tell me, Mr. Lee, what connects Miss Kay to the others besides you? Lee thought for a moment. She wrote about the Vaziri case. Years later, under another name. The piece was never published. It was too close to libel. Voss must have killed it. She told me she kept a copy for conscience's sake. Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. Ah, the spice of truth, withheld but not discarded. Celia crossed her arms. If this is about that old case, I had nothing to do with it. No, Wolfe said. You were Voss's consultant when he moved into food brands. You reshaped his image, turned him from a lawyer to a culinary savant. That kind of transformation requires selective truth. Did you know Miss Vaziri's designs inspired his company's logo? Celia's lips pressed together. That was a coincidence. I didn't know the connection. Coincidences, Wolfe said, are the garnish of liars. I saw her flinch before she covered it with a glare. You're implying I'm part of this. I imply nothing. I deduce, Wolfe said. You and Mr. Lee share a secret past, one buried under paperwork and pride. Whoever our anonymous correspondent is, they intend to dig it up. Publicly. I could almost feel the clock ticking louder. The brownstone seemed smaller, as if the air itself had leaned in to listen. At 1 o'clock exactly, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't wait for instructions. On the step was a wooden crate. Small, heavy, and marked with the word fragile in red ink. No courier, no truck in sight. I brought it in carefully. Fritz hovered in the doorway, muttering in German. Wolfe nodded to me. Open it. Inside was a glass decanter, stoppered and half-filled with a pale amber liquid. A note was tied around its neck with a crimson ribbon. Taste, if you dare to correct your measure. Fritz recoiled. No man of sense drinks unknown liquor delivered anonymously. True, Wolfe said, but the gesture is significant. It invites surrender to curiosity, which is the first flaw of any craftsman. He looked at Lee. You said this began a week ago. Why wait until now to come? Because I thought it was personal, Lee said. Someone playing with my nerves. I didn't think it would spread. It always spreads, Wolfe said. He gestured toward the kitchen. Fritz, seal that decanter and the jars and glass containers. We will analyze later. Mr. Goodwin, you will escort Miss Brandt home and verify that she remains unmolested. Mr. Lee will stay here. I wish to learn how much our anonymous alchemist knows of his past. Celia frowned. You're sending me away? Temporarily, Wolfe said. I prefer to separate variables before computation. Lee looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to cross Wolfe when the man was computing. I took Celia's coat and opened the door for her. Outside, the air smelled like rain and decisions. When we reached her car, she turned to me. "Archie, do you believe him? That this is all connected?" "I believe Wolfe doesn't waste words," I said. "If he says it's connected, you can bet someone's tying the knots." She looked past me toward the brownstone, eyes narrowing. "Then we'd better hope he figures out who's holding the rope before they pull it tight." I watched her drive off, then went back inside. Wolfe was still at his desk, unmoved, while Lee sat hunched over, staring at his hands. On the desk, the note and the decanter gleamed under the lamplight like promises you shouldn't keep. Wolfe looked up as I entered. "Mr. Goodwin, we will not eat until the evening. I find that hunger sharpens the intellect." "Sure," I said, "but what if they're not done sending appetizers?" He gave a slow, thin smile. "Then, Archie, we shall see if their recipe includes murder." By the time Celia's car taillights had vanished around the corner, the air inside the brownstone felt thick enough to slice. Wolfe hadn't moved. He sat staring at the decanter as if it had announced an opinion he found offensive. I waited, because with Wolfe, silence is a working tool. When he speaks, it's only because the internal machinery has clicked into place. Finally, he said, "Mr. Goodwin, I require that we regard this as an attack upon this house. Not merely me, this establishment, our system, our peace. Someone has found it necessary to involve my kitchen in metaphor. That cannot stand." "Then it's war," I said. "You want the artillery or the cavalry?" He ignored that. "You will bring Mr. Panzer here at once. He will attend Miss Brandt, not you. I need your eyes elsewhere." "Where?" "At the center of the seasoning," Wolfe said. "You will visit Lionel Voss. Quietly, his reaction will tell us whether this entire charade was baked in his oven." Lee lifted his head. "You think Voss is behind this?" "I think he is an origin. Whether he acts or inspires others to act remains to be seen." I nodded. "All right. Address?" Lee scribbled one on the back of his business card. "Downtown, Battery Park Tower, 32nd floor. His firm's called Voss Culinary Strategies. Don't let the name fool you. He's still a lawyer at heart." That made sense. I pocketed the card, called Saul, and told him the new assignment. He didn't waste words. He never does. When I came back, Wolfe was pouring a finger of beer, not because he wanted it, but because he was measuring calm. "Mr. Lee will remain here," he said. "You may use the sedan. I prefer inconspicuous efficiency. Observe, listen, and return. Do not challenge." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. "Do I ask him about the jars?" "You will not need to," Wolfe said. "He will tell you something he intends as misdirection. Listen for the ingredients he omits." It was good advice, as usual. I left him with Fritz and a man who looked like he might crack in two if he blinked too fast. The drive downtown was fast. Midday traffic had one of its rare moods of cooperation. The weather had gone from threatening to gloomy, which suited my errand. Voss's office was one of those glassed-in perches where successful people pretend to be humble about views that could make a monk reconsider poverty. A receptionist with cheekbones like architecture asked if I had an appointment. I told her my name, and her smile vanished as if someone had turned off the light behind it. "I'll see if Mr. Voss is available," she said, voice on autopilot. She didn't have to. He was already coming down the hall, trim in a charcoal suit, silver hair that had never met wind. His eyes were pale and quick, lawyer's eyes that had seen too many confessions. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I was wondering when you'd arrive." That set off a small bell in my head. "Then this is convenient," I said. "Mind if we talk a minute?" He gestured to his office. The place was lined with glass shelves of spice jars, real ones, hundreds of them, labeled in small, neat handwriting. It looked like a chemist's dream and a chef's confession. "Quite a collection," I said. He smiled faintly. "A hobby. I find order comforting." Me too, I said, though I tend to prefer less paprika. He laughed softly. You're here about Damon, I assume. He's been anxious. That's one word. You two worked together. Years ago, Voss said, sitting behind his desk. He handled the kind of details lawyers aren't supposed to touch. I paid him well and he left quietly. Why? Has he told you something dramatic? Depends what you call dramatic. Someone's been sending gifts, spices, notes, even a drink. You familiar with that? For the first time, something flickered behind those pale eyes. He picked up a small jar from his desk and turned it between his fingers. I've heard whispers. People in this business, branding, flavor, indulgence, they enjoy metaphors. I assume this is a stunt. Who'd benefit from it? Anyone who wants to make me nervous. There are a few. Competitors, writers. Miss Brandt, perhaps. She resents my success. She said you were charming until money started to smell like seasoning. He smiled again, and this time it had teeth. She would say that. She sells reputation. I sell results. I let the silence breathe for a second. Damon says someone threatened to expose an old case. Vaziri. The smile died. That's ancient history. Sure, I said. But history has a habit of going public when people start typing anonymously. He leaned forward. Let me be clear, Mr. Goodwin. That case was settled legally and privately. Anyone implying otherwise will find themselves sued for a sum that makes remorse unaffordable. I stood. Fair enough. But if someone's stirring your past, you might want to find out which spoon they're using. The next package might not be spices. He said nothing, and that told me plenty. On my way out, the receptionist gave me a look halfway between curiosity and pity. Outside, the clouds had decided to follow me uptown. I drove back, replaying his expression when I'd said Vaziri's name. He hadn't been surprised. He'd been offended. That's worse. When I got to the brownstone, Fritz let me in with a whisper that the house was untenably unsettled. Lee was pacing, and Wolfe was on the phone, speaking in short, clipped sentences. When he hung up, he looked at me. Report. I gave it to him clean. The jars, the spice shelves, the denial. Wolfe listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, Voss is an aesthete. He collects control. The correspondence was not his invention, but he approves of it, which means he knows who is responsible, or soon will. Lee stepped forward. Then we go to him again, together. Make him talk. Sit down, Wolfe said sharply. You will not go anywhere. Mr. Voss is being handled, and Miss Brandt is under Panzer's protection. Our immediate concern is Miss Kay. She's still missing, I said. She will not remain so, Wolfe said. The person orchestrating this intends to display her. Symbolism demands witnesses. That was when the phone rang again. Fritz answered, listened, and went pale. He handed the receiver to me without a word. Goodwin, I said. A woman's voice came through, soft, strained. Archie? Daphne? Yes, they want... There was a sharp sound. Maybe a door or a hand. Archie, tell Wolfe. Tell him the measure. Static swallowed the rest. Then the line went dead. I looked at Wolfe. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes had the dark gleam that meant his mind was already 10 steps ahead. She lives, he said quietly. But they intend the next message to be final. Mr. Goodwin, no dinner tonight. We hunt. That was the closest I'd ever heard him come to raising his voice. Wolfe's words hung in the air like smoke that refused to disperse. We hunt. Coming from him, it didn't mean he was going to leave the house. He'd sooner skip dinner for a week. But it meant the hunt had started, and the prey, whoever they were, had just made the mistake of touching a nerve. Lee sank into his chair, face drained, hands knotted together like rope. She's alive, he muttered, half to himself. They wouldn't have let her call otherwise. Unless they wanted her to, I said. That's the trick with bait. You have to let it wriggle. He looked at me, eyes raw. "You think they'll kill her?" Wolfe's voice came from behind his desk, quiet but absolute. "No, not yet. Their purpose is exposition, not slaughter. They wish to demonstrate." He leaned forward slightly, fingertips touching, "But we must not give them time to finish their performance." "Then let's go," Lee said, starting up. "We will do nothing," Wolfe said. "You will remain where you are. Mr. Goodwin will act." That was my cue, as always. "Fine. But we're short on data. We've got spices, riddles, a few suspects, and one missing journalist." "And a deadline," Wolfe said. The correspondence indicated a sequence. The balance begins at 1. That implies subsequent stages. We must anticipate what 2 entails. "Got a hunch?" I asked. "Of course," he said, as though it were an insult to question it. "But before conjecture, confirmation. Mr. Goodwin, Miss Kay's last known contact was her editor, I presume." "Probably," I said. "She freelanced for the Ledger. They're in Midtown." "Go," Wolfe said. "Discover who she met, where, and what she intended to publish. Be quick, but precise." I grabbed my coat, leaving Lee muttering oaths at the carpet. Outside, the rain had finally decided to commit. The streets gleamed with wet light, the kind that makes everyone hurry without knowing why. Midtown was its usual stew of cabs, horns, and impatience. The Ledger offices smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. I flashed my license at the front desk and got sent upstairs to features. A skinny kid with ink on his cuffs pointed me toward a cubicle buried under paper. The man inside looked like he'd been printed in grayscale, pale, rumpled, and already halfway to exhausted. "Name's Aaron Dell," he said when I introduced myself. "You're from Wolfe's agency. Daphne mentioned him once, I think." "She's mentioned worse," I said. "When did you last hear from her?" He rubbed his eyes. 2 days ago. She said she had something big, something that rebalanced the scales. I thought she was talking about food trends. God knows that's her beat, but she was serious, almost scared. She say where she was going. He frowned, digging through a stack of notes. "There's a bar, the Ember, down on 9th. She said she was meeting someone there Wednesday night. Didn't say who. She just said, it's time someone took the recipe back." That fit the metaphor perfectly, which didn't make me feel better. "You didn't hear from her after?" "No." He hesitated. "This morning, someone called asking about her. Said they were collecting her ingredients. I thought it was a prank." "Did they leave a name?" He shook his head. "But they asked if I knew Wolfe's address." That put a chill down my spine. They were escalating, closing the circle. I thanked him and left, calling Wolfe from the car. He answered on the second ring, voice flat as ever. "Report." She met someone at the Ember Wednesday night. Told her editor she was taking the recipe back. "Somebody called him today asking for your address." A pause. Then we are, as I suspected, inside their timetable." "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "that 2 will occur before sunset. Return at once." I made it back in 20 minutes flat. Fritz let me in with a face that could have curdled milk. Wolfe was in his chair and Lee was standing by the window, pale and twitchy. "They called again," Lee said before I could open my mouth. "This time they didn't say anything, just played music, some kind of chant." "Describe it," Wolfe said. "Old-fashioned. Foreign. Like Turkish, maybe." "Or Persian," Wolfe murmured. "The origin of sumac." Fritz muttered, "Gott im Himmel," under his breath. Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Archie, the second jar contained a blend of cinnamon and clove. Sweetness masking bitterness. Symbolically, that suggests affection corrupted or artistry exploited. Voss and Miss Brandt were both exploiters of talent. Mr. Lee was its broker, Miss Kay its chronicler." "Then who's the cook?" I asked. Patience, Wolfe said. Whoever is orchestrating this intends to convene all parties, and since Miss Kay's absence dramatizes the point, I expect an invitation shortly. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Fritz jumped. Wolfe said, "Answer it," and I went. No courier this time. A plain white envelope, slid under the door. No address. Inside, another card. 2. Gather your ingredients. The table will be set at 7. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it once, twice, then looked at the clock. 6 hours. Very well. Mr. Goodwin, we will oblige them. Lee stared. You mean go? I will not, Wolfe said. But my agents will. They expect participation. We shall provide it, on our terms. He turned to me. Saul will rejoin you. You will visit Miss Brandt's apartment and escort her to a neutral location. Call it precaution. Then both of you will proceed to this ember. Observe. Do not interfere unless necessity insists. Understood, I said. And if they serve anything labeled house special? He almost smiled. Declined politely. I called Saul, who was already nearby with his Plymouth. We drove uptown through the rain that had turned to mist, the city shimmering like an unwritten confession. Celia Brandt's building was modern. Steel and money, no doorman, just security cameras that blinked like disinterested eyes. She opened the door before I knocked, hair down, eyes sharper than before. I figured you'd come, she said. They called me too. What did they say? She handed me her phone. The screen showed a single text. The measure completes at 7. Don't be late. Saul whistled. Efficient lunatics, they schedule their crimes. Celia looked at me. You really think this has to do with that old case? I think whoever started this thinks it does, I said. And they're cooking up a grand finale. She grabbed her coat. Then let's get it over with. By the time we reached the ember, the sky was the color of wet copper. The place was half underground, the kind of bar where shadows outnumber patrons. A red light glowed above the door like a warning or an invitation. It depended how you looked at it. Saul cut the engine. 7 on the nose, he said. I looked through the windshield. The silhouettes of 2 people waited inside the entrance. One tall, one slight. Neither moved. I turned to Celia. Ready? Not even close, she said. But open the door anyway. I did. And as we stepped into the amber light, I realized Wolfe was right. The table was set. We just didn't know who was doing the serving. The ember wasn't much for comfort. Half the lights were low enough to make you guess who you were talking to, and the air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and old bourbon. A jazz trio was tuning up in the corner, but it sounded more like a negotiation than a rehearsal. Saul and I stepped in first, giving the place a professional sweep with our eyes, while Celia lingered near the door, poised but tense, like someone expecting a summons. There were maybe a dozen patrons, all pretending not to notice us. Behind the bar stood a woman in a white jacket that belonged in a lab more than a lounge. She was short, dark-haired, precise, the kind of person who made every motion look deliberate. Her eyes found ours before we'd even decided where to sit. She gave a small nod toward the back corner booth, where 2 glasses waited on a table that hadn't seen use all evening. Saul leaned closer and muttered, "They set the stage." "Yeah," I said, "and they know their cues." Celia followed us, her heels making small, sharp sounds against the floor. When we reached the booth, she stopped short. The 2 glasses weren't empty. One held a clear liquid, water maybe, and the other a deep red blend that caught the light like blood under glass. Between them sat a folded card with the word 3 printed in black block letters. Celia's breath hitched. "You think this is real?" "Too much effort for a prank," I said. Saul pulled a small black light pen from his coat. Standard Panzer equipment. He passed it over the glasses. Nothing glowed. He frowned. "Clean. Whoever set this up didn't want to Kill anyone. Yet, the bartender approached, calm as a metronome. You're early, she said. Her voice was soft, but there was a precision to it that reminded me of Wolfe dictating an invoice. Funny, I said. We didn't realize there was a reservation. There always is, she said. Mr. Wolfe was expected. That pulled the air out of the room. Celia turned sharply. Wolfe? Yes, the bartender said, though I see he sent his proxy. Her eyes flicked to me. That would make you Mr. Goodwin. I've been called worse. You got a name? She smiled faintly. Mina. It's not my first, but it will do. Saul's stance shifted. Barely perceptible, but enough that anyone trained would notice. You the one sending the spices? Mina tilted her head. Not exactly. I curate. Celia's voice was tight. Where's Daphne Kay? For the first time, Mina's smile faded. Safe, for now. You'll see her soon. But first, the others must arrive. The others? I said. Mina's gaze moved toward the door just as it opened. Two figures stepped in, Voss, immaculate as always, and a man I didn't recognize. Tall, raw-boned, with a face that looked like it had been carved by disapproval. Voss saw us and stopped short. Goodwin, what in God's name? Save it, I said. Looks like you're on the guest list too. Mina gestured to the table. Please, sit. The course begins when everyone is present. Voss hesitated, then moved to the booth opposite us. The tall man sat beside him without invitation. He didn't look around. His eyes were fixed on Mina. Celia stayed standing. I'm not drinking anything. Of course not, Mina said. You're the palate cleanser. Saul leaned toward me, voice low. We need to get a line out to Wolfe. Now. Already on it, I said. My phone was in my pocket, set to transmit. Wolfe would be listening, probably fuming that someone had dared to host a performance without consulting him. Mina stepped closer to the table. You've all seasoned the same dish for years, she said, voice carrying just enough to reach the far wall. Deceit, ambition, compromise, the usual ingredients of progress. But the balance has been lost. So tonight, we restore it. Voss sneered. You sound like a manifesto. I am merely the messenger, she said. The recipe isn't mine. I'm here to serve it. The tall man beside Voss spoke for the first time. Enough poetry. Where's Kay? Mina turned to him. Impatient, Mr. Tripp. How very predictable. You insure the risks of others but can't abide your own. Saul's eyes met mine. Tripp. Benno Tripp, the insurance man Lee had mentioned. That made 4, which meant the whole circle was nearly closed. Mina looked toward the door again. Ah, our final guest. The room seemed to still. Through the doorway came a figure I almost didn't recognize. Daphne Kay. She was pale, thinner, eyes shadowed but sharp. When she saw us, she stopped, one hand gripping the frame. Mina, she said, voice brittle. You shouldn't have brought them. They brought themselves, Mina said gently. Everyone always does. Celia started forward, but Saul stopped her with a hand. Daphne moved toward the booth slowly, as if the air itself weighed something. I told you not to do this, Daphne said. You said it was just exposure, not... Mina raised a hand. You gave me the truth, Daphne. You wanted it to come out. You said the story mattered more than the people. Daphne's voice broke. I didn't mean... But Mina wasn't listening. She reached for the card on the table and flipped it over. On the back, in the same careful typeface, were 3 words. The spice burns. Before I could move, a hiss came from the air vent above us. A faint, sweet smell spread. Sharp citrus. Smoky. Almost intoxicating. Celia covered her mouth. Saul had already pulled a handkerchief over his nose. I grabbed Celia's arm and pulled her toward the exit, shouting for the others to move. Voss coughed, stumbled to his feet. Tripp swore and lurched for Mina, but she was already behind the bar, pressing something under the counter. A door clicked open behind her, leading to a narrow stairway. Saul was closest and darted forward, but a cloud of the same scent hit him square, and he staggered back, choking. I dragged Celia up the stairs and into the night. The door slammed behind us. For a second, the cool air was all that existed. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. Celia gasped, leaning against the wall. What was that? Something Wolfe's nose would have hated, I said, catching my breath. And if I had to guess, the next act's already started. Because somewhere below, the embers' lights flickered out, and the street smelled faintly, horribly, of burning spice. The smoke came fast, curling up the stairwell like it had somewhere urgent to be. Saul was the first through the door behind us, coughing but upright. He slammed it shut, braced his shoulder against it, and said, "That wasn't smoke, it was gas. Not lethal, but damn close." "Close enough," I said. The scent still clung to my throat, spicy and metallic, like someone had burned a kitchen full of ambition. Celia leaned against the brick wall, pale and shaking. The street was empty except for a parked delivery van 2 doors down, engine idling. "Stay here," Saul said, already moving. He approached the van, opened the driver's door, and found it empty. The keys were in the ignition, the dashboard clock blinking 7:19. He killed the engine and came back. "No driver, no plates. Rented or stolen. But it's their getaway." "Assuming anyone got away," I said. I turned back toward the door, listening. There were muffled sounds from below, voices, maybe coughing, maybe worse. "We have to check inside." Celia grabbed my arm. "Archie, you can't go back down there. You'll choke." "I've been in worse restaurants," I said. Saul gave me a look that meant don't do anything stupid, which, from him, passes as affection. He pulled a small respirator from his coat pocket, trust Panzer to be ready for airborne war, and handed it over. I went down half the steps before I saw the haze thickening. The lights were dim, flickering through the smoke. I could hear movement, metal scraping, something falling. Then a voice, hoarse but steady. "Here!" It was Daphne Kay. I followed the sound and found her crouched behind the overturned booth, coughing hard. The bar beyond her was empty. Mina gone, Voss and Tripp nowhere in sight. "Come on," I said, pulling her up. She stumbled but stayed conscious. "You all right?" Her eyes were wet and furious. She said it was just a reckoning, just exposure. She lied. "I'm shocked," I said. "You can tell me the details upstairs." We made it up the stairs with Saul's help. Celia moved aside as we brought Daphne into the cool night air. She collapsed against the wall, trembling but alive. "Where are the others?" Saul asked. "Gone," she said. "Mina had an exit. She planned it. Voss and Tripp went after her when the gas hit." "Any idea where?" I asked. Daphne nodded weakly. She said the final balance would be struck at midnight. Something about the table being reset. She meant Wolfe's table. That got me upright. "She's going to the brownstone." Celia's eyes widened. "She wouldn't." "She would," I said. "She's been orchestrating this whole performance. Wolfe's the only audience she respects." Saul didn't waste time. "We call him." I was already dialing. Fritz picked up, sounding like a man answering the gates of heaven during a thunderstorm. "Mr. Goodwin, thank God. Mr. Wolfe says you're to return at once. We've had visitors." "Who?" "2 men," Fritz said. "They claim to represent the police. I did not believe them. They left when Mr. Wolfe refused entry. But they were agitated." "Agitated how?" "One carried a briefcase that clicked," Fritz said grimly. "And they mentioned something about balancing the account." "Hold the fort," I said. "We're on our way." We piled into the sedan. Saul took the wheel. He drives like a mathematician, fast but precise. I called Lon Cohen on the way and told him to have the nearest patrol car watch the brownstone discreetly. No sirens, no lights. If Mina wanted drama, we weren't giving her the stage. The drive uptown felt longer than it should have. Rain streaked the windshield, and the city blurred past like scenery in a fever dream. Daphne sat in the back seat between Celia and me, whispering fragments of what she remembered. She called it the restoration, Daphne said. A cleansing. She said everyone who had tasted the profit would face exposure. Voss sold designs he didn't own. Tripp ensured fraud. Celia marketed lies. Lee hid the trail, and Wolfe. She stopped. I leaned closer. And Wolfe what? She said he legitimized it. That when he declined the case years ago, he allowed it to rot quietly. She said he was the last ingredient. I didn't like that one bit. He's going to love that, I muttered. When we pulled up in front of the brownstone, the street was dark except for a single light in Wolfe's office window. Saul parked across the street. I told the others to stay put, but Daphne grabbed my sleeve. You can't confront her alone. I won't, I said. Wolfe's the one she came for. I'm just the doorman. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. Fritz met me in the hall, pale but steady. She's here, he whispered. In the office. Mr. Wolfe insists you come at once. I stepped into the office, and sure enough, there she was. Mina, standing near the Globe bar, dressed in black, calm as a librarian. Wolfe sat behind his desk, motionless, eyes heavy-lidded but alert. Ah, Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, as if we were discussing the weather. Miss Mina has come to lecture me on culinary ethics. I prefer the term balance, Mina said, her voice even. You of all men should appreciate that, Mr. Wolfe. Too much indulgence dulls the palate. Too much restraint starves the soul. You built a career on tasting corruption from afar and calling it deduction. Wolfe's brows rose. Madame, I detect only corruption that offends the intellect. The rest belongs to philosophers or penitents. She smiled faintly. You refused the Vaziri case when you could have exposed it. You let it stew until everyone at that table learned to eat lies. You are mistaken, Wolfe said. I refused it because it bored me. Morally tawdry, legally unremarkable. I deal in enigmas, not accounting. You, however, have made yourself one. Mina's hand slipped into her coat. I took a step forward. Easy, I said. Let's not garnish the conversation with bullets. She pulled out not a gun, but a small glass vial, the same pale amber liquid from the earlier decanter. Do you know what this is? She asked. Regret in liquid form, I said. Truth, she said softly. Distilled from their sins. One drop each from those who profited off her work. Tonight I return it to the man who let it happen. Pfui, Wolfe said. Symbolism is the refuge of the undisciplined. You seek absolution through spectacle. Call it what you like, Mina said. She uncorked the vial. I was halfway across the room when Saul burst in from the kitchen, silent and swift. He caught her wrist before the liquid hit the desk. The vial slipped, shattered, and a sharp scent filled the air. Citrus, smoke, something bitter beneath it. Mina gasped, eyes wide, then went limp. Saul caught her before she hit the floor. The air shimmered with the sharp tang of what could have been poison or perfume. Fritz rushed in with a towel covering his mouth. Mein Gott, what is that? Wolfe leaned back, fanning the air. Hubris, he said calmly. Fortunately, it evaporates quickly. I checked Mina's pulse. Steady but weak. She'd inhaled enough of her own creation to drop her. Saul looked at Wolfe. She'll live. Yes, Wolfe said, and she will talk. Tomorrow. Tonight we let the air clear. Outside, sirens were drawing closer. Celia and Daphne were at the door, staring in. Wolfe waved them away. Archie, he said, voice lower now, thoughtful. Remind me to tell Inspector Kramer that not every performance deserves a critic. I nodded, closing the door behind me. The air was sharp, clean, almost normal again. For now. Because one thing about balance, it never lasts long in this city. The sirens were close enough to rattle the window glass before Wolfe spoke again. He hadn't moved from his chair, but his eyes followed the sound with the faint irritation of a man listening to bad violin practice. Saul was crouched by Mina, checking her pulse a second time, while I opened the front door to wave the uniforms in before they decided to break it down. Inspector Kramer came first, chewing his cigar like it had insulted him. He stopped short when he saw Wolfe sitting there as calm as a cathedral. "You called this in, Wolfe?" "I did not," Wolfe said. "Someone, perhaps one of your more excitable subordinates, acted preemptively. The disturbance has ended." Kramer looked from Mina's unconscious form to Saul and back to me. "Ended, huh? Looks like somebody ended something. Start talking, Goodwin." So I did, in the streamlined version, how Mina had lured her audience to the ember, turned the air into soup, and then come here for her curtain call. I left out the philosophy and the perfume. Kramer doesn't like metaphors unless they come with fingerprints. When I finished, he grunted. "So she's the brains behind this spice nonsense." "She's the fool behind it," Wolfe said. "Brains imply foresight. Miss Mina relied on melodrama." Kramer knelt beside her and sniffed the air. "What's that smell?" "Citrus oil and burnt sumac," I said. "Don't ask how I know." "Poison?" "Doubtful," Wolfe said. "The composition was designed for effect, not lethality. She wanted theater." Kramer squinted up at him. "And the others? Voss, Brandt, the rest of your culinary philosophers?" "They are unharmed," Wolfe said, "though perhaps chastened." Kramer snorted. "Chastened, hell. You realize this is going to be a circus in the morning? Journalists, lawyers, maybe a few sponsors from the health department if they find out somebody was cooking gas in a bar." "I anticipated as much," Wolfe said. "You may have the woman. She will survive to stand trial. But before you go, I require a few minutes of her consciousness." "You're not interrogating her here," Kramer said. "I am not interrogating," Wolfe said. "I am clarifying. You may witness, if you insist." I knew that tone. When Wolfe said clarify, it meant he already knew the answer but wanted the confession to match his phrasing. Kramer grumbled, but gestured for the medics. They brought in a stretcher, pumped a bit of oxygen under Mina's nose, and within a minute her eyelids fluttered open. She looked around, saw Wolfe, and gave a weak smile. "So it ends here," she whispered. "It never began elsewhere," Wolfe said. "You chose this house for your finale because you believed I was culpable. You are wrong. Explain yourself." She closed her eyes. "You refused her case. Hala Vaziris. You could have exposed Voss. You didn't. You let them all prosper on her ruin." Wolfe's voice stayed low. "Nonsense. My refusal was based on evidence, not morality. I declined many cases for lack of intellectual novelty. I am no crusader." "But you are an authority," Mina said. "When you refuse to name corruption, you bless it by silence." "That," Wolfe said, "is a child's view of justice. I am not a moral agent of the universe. I am an analyst. I find truth, not purity." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Then you'll never see the difference between them." Kramer shifted impatiently. "Enough philosophy. She's going to Bellevue and then holding. You can quote Aristotle to her later." "Do," Wolfe said dryly. "He is often misrepresented." The medics lifted her onto the stretcher. Mina's head lolled to the side, and as they passed me, she whispered something that barely made sound. "The last jar." I caught it but didn't understand it until we were alone again. The uniforms had gone. Saul and Fritz were cleaning the shards off the floor, and Wolfe was back to his chair, eyes closed, lips pursed in that thinking line that means something's ticking under the surface. I said, "She mentioned a Last jar. You think she meant one of those she sent earlier? Wolfe opened his eyes. Perhaps. Did you examine them thoroughly? They're in the kitchen, sealed in glass, like you said. Fetch them. I did. The 2 jars, sumac and the darker blend, sat side by side on the counter. Wolfe gestured for Fritz to bring a tray and a spoon. I set the jars down on the desk while Fritz hovered, disapproving as a priest at a poker table. Wolfe removed the lids, leaned forward, and sniffed, just once each. He grunted. As I thought. Which is? I asked. The blends are incomplete. Each contains half a compound, inoffensive separately, corrosive when combined. She intended a final gesture, an alchemical epilogue, as it were. Celia, who had been standing silently near the door, spoke then. She meant to destroy something here. You. No, Wolfe said. She meant to destroy evidence. Or perhaps herself. But she lacked the patience to complete the formula. Sentiment intervened. Daphne, pale and tired, had joined us from the hall. She wasn't evil, she said softly. Just obsessed. She thought exposure was redemption. Obsession, Wolfe said, is the common spice of mediocrity. She mistook drama for consequence. That ended the discussion. Fritz carried the jars away, grumbling about contaminating his air. Celia excused herself to call her lawyer, and Saul went to file his quiet report for Kramer. The brownstone settled back into its usual stillness. By 10:30, the rain had stopped. I'd finished my notes and poured 2 glasses of beer. Wolfe had returned to his orchids for a perfunctory check, his way of restoring the world's order after human interference. When he came back, he lowered himself into his chair with a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Well, I said, that's that. 1 cracked zealot, 4 frightened clients, no dead bodies. For us, that's practically a holiday. Phooey, Wolfe said. Do not reduce the affair to a jest. Miss Mina's folly was dangerous. She believed morality could be measured like cumin, and when the flavor displeased her, she sought to remake the world. That conceit has ruined greater minds. Sure, I said, but at least she didn't manage to blow up your office. That's something. He closed his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, I will remind you that my office is not a stage. Could have fooled Mina, I said. Or Kramer, or about half the city once they read tomorrow's headlines. Wolfe gave me one of his thin smiles. Let them. Sensation is temporary. Balance, if it exists, restores itself quietly. That was as close as he ever got to satisfaction. He reached for the beer, took a measured sip, and added, Mr. Lee and the others will survive their exposure. Perhaps they will even learn restraint. It is, however, a quality seldom cultivated. I leaned back in my chair. You mean balance? No, Wolfe said. Humility. He set his glass down, reached for his book, and the case was over. The room settled into its proper silence again, the kind that fits the brownstone like skin. Outside, a cab honked, a city resumed its noise, and inside, Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe opened his eyes just long enough to say, Goodwin, if there is any hint of sumac in the kitchen, I shall relocate to Montenegro. I grinned. I'll tell Fritz to stick with basil. The corner of Wolfe's mouth twitched, the ghost of amusement. Adequate, he said, and that was the final verdict. By midnight, the last of the rain had dried on the windows, and the only scent left in the house was that of order restored, something between orchids and irony. Morning came to the brownstone with the kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's aftermath. The sun hadn't fully decided to show up yet, and the house still smelled faintly of smoke and spice, like a memory trying to fade. Fritz was already in the kitchen, making an omelette with the care of a surgeon, and from the sound of it, he was putting more emphasis on precision than forgiveness. When I came down, Wolfe was in his chair, reading the Times with his usual scowl of selective interest. He had a habit of scanning news like a man filtering dirt for gold. He didn't care about the world's tragedies, only its patterns. The front page carried a story about last night's little culinary apocalypse. Mystery woman stages. Spice. Stunt in West Side bar. 2 detained, 1 hospitalized. It mentioned Wolfe's name once, carefully, as a private investigator reportedly present during the incident. That would have burned Kramer like chili oil. I poured myself coffee and said, "Well, we made the morning edition. No photos, though. Your orchids remain anonymous." "Thank heaven for journalistic ineptitude," Wolfe said. "Public curiosity is an infection one must avoid." He turned a page, his eyes flicking left to right. "Kramer called an hour ago. He has arrested Mr. Voss and Mr. Tripp on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Miss Mina's confession was illuminating, if hysterical." "Celia and Lee released," Wolfe said. "Celia Brandt will attempt reinvention, as such people do. Mr. Lee, however, remains in my debt." I raised an eyebrow. "Financial or existential?" "Intellectual," Wolfe said. He presented me with a puzzle. Flawed, but with sufficient symmetry to justify my attention. I sat opposite him. And what symmetry was that? Because from where I stood it looked like chaos dressed for dinner. He folded the paper neatly. "You underestimate the design. Miss Mina believed she was restoring equilibrium to a corrupted system. Her chosen metaphor, spice, was apt. She assembled the participants of the original fraud, recreated the balance of ingredients, and sought to purge the excess. But she erred in one respect." "Only one?" Wolfe's gaze met mine. "She forgot that bitterness is also a flavor." That was Wolfe's way of saying she'd been doomed the moment she let personal resentment shape her morality. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I agreed. "So, case closed." "On the contrary," he said. "A conclusion is not closure. There is a loose end." He pointed toward the folded note I'd left on the edge of his desk. The last message Mina had tried to send before Saul stopped her. I'd almost forgotten it. It was just a fragment scrawled in a pencil, half finished when she'd been taken away, for the one who never tasted. "Meaning?" I asked. "Ambiguous," Wolfe said, "but intriguing. Miss Mina's symbolic vocabulary suggests she referred to a participant who escaped, her reckoning, one who profited without exposure." "Voss, Brandt, Tripp, Lee, Kay," I said, ticking them off on my fingers. "That's 5 ingredients. Who's the 6th? He closed his eyes briefly, as if consulting some internal ledger. "The name Vaziri recurs, but she was the victim, not the conspirator. Yet her silence, too, was purchased." "You think she's still around?" "I think she never left," Wolfe said. "Or rather, she has been around under another name." He reached for a slip of paper and wrote a single word on it, then turned it toward me. "Celia." I whistled low. "You're saying Celia Brandt is Hala Vaziri?" "Precisely," Wolfe said. "The transformation was cosmetic and professional, but the psychological profile is unmistakable. Mina's entire crusade was built on rescuing Hala's integrity. Imagine her disillusion when she discovered her supposed martyr thriving under a pseudonym, selling illusions of her own." "That would push her over the edge," I admitted. "But how do you know?" "Observation," he said simply. "Miss Brandt's facility with aesthetic metaphor, her disdain for imitation, her peculiar phrasing, over-salting narratives to sell thirst. Only the creator of those designs would employ such culinary conceits in speech. She betrayed herself in language." "That's neat, but you could just ask her," I said. "If she's Vaziri, the whole case flips. Mina wasn't the villain. She was the messenger who found out the saint was a fraud." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And now, Mr. Goodwin, you will verify it. Call Miss Brandt." Request that she visit this morning, under the pretense of final clarification for the police report. I called. Celia answered on the second ring, voice crisp but tired. She agreed to come for 10 minutes, no more. That was fine. Wolfe rarely needed more. She arrived half an hour later, immaculate as ever, but carrying a tension that didn't belong to a woman who thought she was free. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He merely gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Brant," he said, "thank you for coming. I wish to confirm one small detail before closing my files." "Of course," she said. "But make it quick. I've already told Inspector Kramer everything I know." "Not quite everything," Wolfe said. "There remains the matter of your identity." Her eyebrows rose. "My identity?" "Yes," Wolfe said mildly. "You were born Hala Vaziri." The silence that followed was almost tactile. Celia's fingers tensed against her purse strap, then relaxed. "That's absurd," she said evenly. "Perhaps," Wolfe said, "but it explains the otherwise inexplicable. Mina's fixation, your evasions, your silence at key moments, and the fact that every one of your current design clients traces back in some fashion to Carthage and Winch, the firm that once exploited Hala Vaziri's name." Her lips tightened. "You have no proof." Wolfe's voice softened, which is what it does when he's already won. "I have Mr. Lee's original report. He kept a copy, contrary to the injunction. He brought it this morning." That did it. She sat very still, then exhaled slowly. "She found out, didn't she?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and she attempted to correct the record by force. You cannot be blamed for protecting yourself, but you can be held accountable for silence that bred violence." Celia looked down at her hands. "Do you plan to tell Kramer?" "No," Wolfe said. "The law punishes fraud, not reinvention. You may continue your work as Miss Brant. I merely suggest a less derivative menu." She stood, pale but composed. "You're letting me go." "I'm letting you remain what you've chosen to become," Wolfe said. "That is punishment enough." When the door closed behind her, I said, "You just let the original victim walk out free." "She is no longer the victim," Wolfe said. "Nor am I her judge. The balance, Mr. Goodwin, is restored." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a deep breath that sounded like the end of a long equation. For once, I didn't argue. Maybe because I finally saw what he meant. Balance isn't about fairness. It's about quiet. And after a week of chaos and metaphor, quiet was worth more than justice. Wolfe opened his eyes and said, "Archie, dinner tonight will be braised lamb with fennel and no experimentation." I grinned. "Balance restored." He gave a small nod. "For the moment." And in the brownstone, where order was a religion and Wolfe its only priest, that counted as peace. The day after Celia Brant, née Hala Vaziri, walked out of the brownstone, the world did what it always does after a storm. It pretended nothing had happened. The Times had moved on to politics, Fritz's omelettes had resumed their peacetime perfection, and Saul sent word that Mina had been transferred quietly to Bellevue, her mind more frayed than her morals. For my part, I wasn't entirely sure what to feel. It had been a week of spices, schemes, and smoke. More metaphor than murder, which meant Wolfe was both satisfied and faintly annoyed. He preferred crimes that could be weighed and measured, not declaimed like verse. That morning, I came into the office to find him writing, slowly, methodically, on his thick cream stationery. He was dictating to himself under his breath, which is as close as he gets to humming. When he finished, he folded the sheet, sealed it in an envelope, and set it aside. "Client correspondence?" I asked. "A note to Inspector Kramer," he said. "A courtesy. He dislikes being made the unwitting custodian of art." I sat down across from him. "You mean Mina?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Her performance was misguided, but not without insight. She understood the symbolic nature of justice better than most policemen. Unfortunately, she mistook herself for its agent. He leaned back, his massive frame sinking into the chair like a continent shifting. The entire affair, Archie, was an experiment in human seasoning. Each participant added their own flavor of deceit. Voss with greed, Tripp with cowardice, Lee with compromise, Kay with curiosity, and Miss Brandt, Hala, with pride. Mina merely stirred the pot. "And you?" I asked. "What did you add?" "Salt," he said dryly, "to preserve the truth from decay." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "You're impossible." "Undoubtedly," he said, "but indispensable." Fritz appeared with a tray of coffee and croissants, the domestic peace treaty signed once more. The kitchen, the orchids, the books, all had returned to their rightful orbit around Nero Wolfe. But even in his comfort, I could tell the case had lodged itself in some private corner of his mind. He'd been insulted by Mina's intrusion into his domain, but also impressed by her design. After breakfast, he surprised me. "Archie, I wish to speak with Miss Kay." I raised an eyebrow. "She's not exactly in a condition for interviews. She's been holed up downtown, trying to forget the taste of sumac." "Then fetch her," Wolfe said. "Tell her I have something that belongs to her." It took a little persuading, but Daphne Kay came that afternoon. She looked better, less haunted, more like the sharp-eyed reporter who could smell a story through locked doors. When she stepped into the office, she hesitated, as if the air still remembered the chaos. Wolfe greeted her with uncharacteristic courtesy. "Miss Kay, please sit. You are the only one of that assembly who did not lie to me outright. I admire that." She managed a thin smile. "I didn't have time to invent a good lie." "Few ever do," Wolfe said. He reached into the drawer of his desk and withdrew the sealed envelope he'd written earlier. "This is for you." She frowned. "What is it?" "The truth," he said, "or what remains of it. It contains the documentation of the Vaziri settlement and the evidence of subsequent fraud. I took the liberty of making a copy before Mr. Lee destroyed the original." She stared at the envelope. "Why give it to me?" "Because you will publish it," Wolfe said. "Not as vengeance, but as record. Mina failed because she sought moral correction through spectacle. You perhaps can manage it through honesty. That will suffice." Daphne's voice was quiet. "You trust me to get it right?" "No," Wolfe said, "but I trust you to try." She stood slowly, clutching the envelope like it weighed something. "And what about Celia, or Hala, or whatever name she decides to wear next?" "She will read it too," Wolfe said. "And she will endure it, because the truth, when balanced properly, is seldom fatal." Daphne nodded once. "Then I'll make sure it's balanced." After she left, I waited until the sound of the front door faded before saying, "You realize you just handed a reporter dynamite." "Hardly," Wolfe said. "It is more akin to fertilizer. The soil of public memory is barren without nourishment. A little scandal ensures growth." "That's poetic," I said. "Maybe Mina rubbed off on you." He gave me a sharp look. "Pfui, poetry is indulgence. I prefer prose." Still, there was something almost philosophical in the way he leaned back, eyes half closed, the faintest curl of amusement on his lips. The phone rang around 5. It was Kramer. I handed Wolfe the receiver, and he listened without speaking for a full minute. When he finally said, "Understood," his voice was low, measured. He hung up and looked at me. "Mina died an hour ago," he said. I didn't say anything for a while. The house felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. "Bellevue?" I asked. He nodded. "An aneurysm. Sudden. Merciful, perhaps." "She'd like that," I said. She wanted her story to end on her terms. "Most people do," Wolfe said. "Few are permitted the luxury." He turned his chair slightly toward the window, with a fading light caught the edge of his profile. There is a lesson in this, Archie. When intellect divorces itself from humility, it breeds madness. Miss Mina sought balance and destroyed herself in the act of achieving it. Miss Vaziri sought reinvention and lost her identity. Only one of them was sincere, and sincerity, regrettably, is no armor. Maybe so, I said, but it makes for one hell of a story. Indeed, he murmured, which is why you will not sell it. That ended the conversation. Fritz came in with beer, and we drank in silence, each of us pretending not to think about the woman who had tried to turn justice into theatre. Outside, the last of the rain drummed faintly on the window panes. Wolfe raised his glass. "To equilibrium," he said. I clinked mine against his. "And to no more spices in the mail." His mouth twitched. A worthy aspiration. He took a long sip, set the glass down, and added, "Dinner at 8, Archie. Duck with fennel. A proper meal. No metaphors." And that was that. The world outside would chew over its scandal. The papers would print their cleaned-up truths, and somewhere a magazine editor would open Daphne Kay's envelope and feel the first tremor of revelation. As for us, the brownstone settled back into its rhythm, the tick of the clock, the hiss of the kitchen, the faint scent of orchids reclaiming the air. Balance restored, if only for the moment. Wolfe didn't say another word until dinner, when he looked up from his plate and said, "Archie, pass the salt. Carefully. Balance is delicate." I did, and if there was the faintest ghost of a smile on his face when he said it, I didn't mention it. Some things, like justice or Wolfe, are best left unseasoned.